Hello, my name is Joanna Trotter, Senior Director of Community Impact for the Chicago Community Trust. The Trust is an over 100-year community foundation serving the Chicago region, and we've committed our efforts towards closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap as part of our 10-year commitment. And we recognize that the important role entrepreneurship plays as a tool for wealth building and job creation. As such, we celebrate the important contributions of businesses of color as cornerstones of an equitable and thriving Chicago economy. And we know that small businesses comprise of 58% of our job growth as a whole and a full 70% in underinvested communities. And nationally, according to AEO, while white adults have 13 times the wealth that Black adults do, when we compare median wealth of Black and white business owners, that gap actually decreases to a multiplier of just 3. However, we know entrepreneurs of color, despite incredible tenacity and passion, face more significant hurdles related to access to skilled and specialized business supports, networks, and responsive and nimble capital. And so a few years ago, as the Trust was really looking to invest in entrepreneurship in the Chicago area, we were quickly overwhelmed as a foundation in the sheer number of organizations providing business support services in our region. In particular, as we were trying to think about those who are doing well in serving entrepreneurs of color, that became even harder to ascertain. And so we reached out to our philanthropic partners who had been funding in the space for many years, and were surprised to find out that they had very similar questions. So we collectively invested in an ecosystem scan to really look at how our current marketplace in Chicago was and was not serving businesses of color. No surprise, this scan, which by the way, engaged small businesses themselves, as well as business service organizations and financial institutions, and it found real significant disparities across race and gender in the number of businesses established that existed in Chicago, the relative performance and growth of those businesses, as well as disparities in access to critical support services and capital resources. Over 300 business organizations exist in the Chicago region, and what we found through this study is that a lot of them are providing generalized business service offerings and not necessarily providing the kind of specialized services that entrepreneurs need in different industries at different growth stages in terms of accessing specialized capital that meet their needs. And so for that reason, we really found this need to create more specialization, collaboration, and partnership within the ecosystem. We also, like across the country, found specific capital gaps in the $50,000 to $250,000 debt range, as well as a desire for increased grant and equity-like products that could better support startup activity for Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. So from this examination, I'll say that our region really responded in 3 core ways. The first is that we began to invest in ecosystem building itself. So how do we bring together organizations and business owners that are within the Chicago marketplace so that there is more collaboration, more sharing of information exchange, as well as working towards a common goal to create a more inclusive regional economy through entrepreneurship. The second piece is really coordinating philanthropy so that we're more aligned in the way that we're doing our grant making, the kind of outcomes we're seeking, as well as supporting the partnerships within the ecosystem that's necessary to enhance this network activity. And then finally, the targeting of new capital products towards entrepreneurs of color. So that's really the Chicago story that I'd like to talk about today. So first, right after the ecosystem scan, we invested in Allies for Community Business, formerly known as Accion, and Small Business Majority, who quickly began to convene over 30 stakeholders, including entrepreneurs themselves, to begin to work together towards enhanced business service delivery, more flexible capital products, as well as industry-specific standards. So that group and that body has been convening for several years now. In addition, philanthropy came together and we co-invested in what's today called the Fund for Equitable Business Growth. This is a multi-funder collaborative designed to enable and support partnerships in the business service organizations sector. So what we recognized in the initial theory around this fund is that we had trusted local stakeholders in communities of color who were often the first points of entry for entrepreneurs of color. But often they're providing basic support services like a business plan, like support with city services, help finding locations. But as we think about that handoff that's necessary as a business needs more industry specialization, mentorship, different supports around growth stage, as well as access to capital, often the door that they were entering stopped and it didn't bring those entrepreneurs into the ecosystem as a whole. So our goal through this fund was to really support the glue, to create more partnerships among local, trusted, culturally competent organizations and those that had the expertise and skills to support entrepreneurs at these different stages of growth. That fund has quickly evolved. We started out with 4 funders and now are excited to say we're up to 7 that have been collaborating and are adding more over time. And so we're really starting to think about other ways that through a funding collective of this nature, we can support other gaps in the ecosystem and continue to fuel that work moving forward. And then the third, and I will say through that collective, we were able to serve 14 business service organization partnerships. Those partnerships served over 2,500 entrepreneurs. And in 2019 is when we launched this strategy, and we funded these groups late in 2019. So they just had a few months to develop their partnerships before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So there was a lot of interesting lessons learned through these partnerships. One, they were able to work together to pivot, to create capacity around the immediate emergency needs of small business owners. They were helping those business owners access new federal funding and local and state funding to help entrepreneurs stay in business during the pandemic. And so we did see some immediate results that we weren't expecting as part of this partnership. One example I'll give is the Light Bulb Collective. This is a partnership between Elevate Energy, which is a local nonprofit focused on energy efficiency in the Chicago marketplace, the Business Service Collective, which is a new social enterprise focused on supporting providing back office services to entrepreneurs, and the Sustainable Options for Urban Living Group, which is also known as SOUL, and they provide business service supports in communities of color in Chicago. And collectively, they launched this partnership in order to get more contractors of color into the dynamic and growing solar industry in Illinois. So one of the organizations and businesses they supported was Boyfriend in a Box. They were a local contractor that through the support of Light Bulb were able to hire an electrician, acquire their needed solar certification. They received back office accounting to get their financials in order and were then able to obtain the Paycheck Protection Program from the federal government after the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And we're seeing that partnership itself evolve, where Business Service Collective is now partnering with other business service organizations to provide back office support. Elevate Energy is doing similar work now in additional geographies within the Chicago region. And that's the kind of thing we want to support, is this both funded but also organic growth of these kind of partnerships over time. The third piece of our core ecosystem building work in the Chicago area is the deployment and the creation of new capital that I like to say is unapologetically targeting and supporting entrepreneurs of color. So right after the study was done, the ecosystem scan, JP Morgan Chase announced in partnership with several other local financial institutions, the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. This was a fund focused on low-cost debt products for this target population, and it worked through Axiom, which again is now Allies for Community Business, as well as the Local Initiative Support Corporation to deploy those loans. In addition, the Chicago Community Trust has for the last 5 years been partnering with the MacArthur Foundation and Calvert Funds around a new impact investing fund called Benefit Chicago. This fund raised $100 million towards deployment of capital in the Chicago region. And the last phase of that fund, which is winding down now, was really targeted on providing support and investment in new equity-like products for entrepreneurs of color. So one example of that is Cast Us. Cast Us is a new fund developed under the leadership of Don Thompson, the former CEO of McDonald's. The fund is now at $70 million at closing and is already starting to provide equity investments in 6 businesses thus far. We're also seeing new providers come into the Chicago marketplace, like Founders First. Our new tech initiative, P33, has launched a fund called Tech Rise. And I think those funds are really interesting, these funds that are designed to support entrepreneurs of color get into these high growth but high financial barrier industries like tech. So what I'd like to end with is just a discussion around how important ecosystem building has been for the Chicago region in the time of COVID-19. I don't need to reiterate, I think many know the impacts of the pandemic on small businesses. 3.3 million businesses had to shut their doors across the nation as a result of the pandemic, and a large majority of Black and Latinx entrepreneurs were heavily impacted. We also knew that some of the federal relief, like Paycheck Protection Program, was fraught because of the channels that were used to deploy that capital to support small businesses. We knew that going in the design of the program, that there were going to be real challenges if you worked through traditional financial institutions, because our research showed that there were large gaps in the ways in which those financial institutions were serving entrepreneurs of color. We knew that entrepreneurs of color were not ready to compete in a matter of weeks for financial resources because they didn't have the technical assistance to get their books in order. And it's things like that of why we decided to organize ourselves as an ecosystem, so as future federal dollars flowed in state and local resources, that we were better able to support entrepreneurs of color in accessing those. So one great program that I want to talk about is our partnership with Cook County. When we began to convene, recognizing some of the challenges with the Paycheck Protection Program, we were really in philanthropy, focusing at least what we could do to provide technical support to those entrepreneurs so that they can access those dollars. However, Cook County came in with their CARES Act funding from the federal government and were able to also provide $10,000 small business grants. We were able to work through 40 local partners who provide business supports, both those at a regional level as well as those deeply rooted in communities of color. And by doing that, we were able to deploy $19 million. We supported over almost close to 1,700 entrepreneurs in getting access to $10,000 grants, as well as one-on-one technical assistance, not only to access resources, but to help pivot in the time of crisis. What we also found by doing this intentional work through trusted partners is that we were able to serve 60% of the businesses were those of color, 50% were women-run and owned and operated businesses. And then if you think about the range of ways businesses are underinvested in those categories, people of color, women, veterans, disabled, in low and moderate income communities, 80% of the entrepreneurs that we served fit at least one of those categories. So what's next on the horizon for the Chicago marketplace? We're just very excited by how much movement there's been in the field just in the matter of 2 years. Part of it is, I think, attributed to the research and the ecosystem building work we were already doing. Part of it is the recognition of the extreme disparities that entrepreneurs were facing and face now because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the racial uprisings. So what's next for us is really thinking about how we measure impact. What is the result of all of this collaborative work on moving the needle for entrepreneurs themselves? So right now, the Chicago region unfortunately has an abysmal number of just 2% of African-American businesses as a whole, compared to the entire population of business owners, and only 5% Latinx, right? So how do we grow that over time? We want to be able as funders to support ecosystem building, but support it in a way that's organic and fosters collaboration naturally. And so in other words, not being too heavy-handed in philanthropy to make this happen. Some of the gaps we want to continue to fill is looking at new capital resources. We want to support new business models like worker cooperatives and ESOPs. We want to support capacity building for business service organizations. So we're really providing the best in class supports to businesses, whatever door they walk in. And finally, as many, we're grappling with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, how do we stabilize this sector? How do we double down now on startups, just given how many established businesses had to close their doors as a result of COVID-19? And how do we think about high growth sectors that are also often high barrier sectors for entrepreneurs of color? So we're really excited about that dynamic work in Chicago. And our goal is to collectively put Chicago on the map as one of the most supportive and successful marketplaces in the nation for diverse businesses. So thank you for having me and allowing me to represent what is such a dynamic effort in Chicago. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.